You wake up at the same time every day. You take the same route to work. You answer messages the second they arrive because you were raised to believe that being reliable is a virtue. You say exactly what you think, exactly when you think it, because honesty feels like integrity. You have a routine and you're proud of it because a routine feels like discipline. Nobody set you down and explained this part. Every one of those habits is a signature, and every signature can be forged, studied, and used against you. The people who quietly run rooms you're not invited in to learn something you were never taught. To be predictable is to be readable, and to be readable is to be governed, not by law, not by force, by something far quieter and far more permanent. Everyone around you already knows what you'll do before you do it. Think about the last time someone finished your sentence before you said it. You probably felt understood. You should have felt exposed. Once another person can complete your thought, they no longer need to negotiate with you. They already know your price. They already know your limit. They already know exactly how far to push before you break, and exactly how little they can offer before you take it anyway. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries before psychology gave a name. He watched princes lose their thrones not because they lacked courage, but because their enemies had learned to read them like a familiar book. A ruler who always answers insult with anger will be insulted on purpose, just to trigger the anger that plays into his enemy's plan. A ruler who always answers loyalty with generosity ends up surrounded by false loyalty, performed purely for reward. The pattern becomes a weapon, not the man, the pattern. And here's the part that should genuinely bother you. You already have patterns. Right now, today, the people close to you, the people you work with, the people competing against you, have already mapped them whether they meant to or not. They know when you say yes. They know when you say no. They know what makes you defensive, what makes you generous, what makes you cave. You built that map yourself, one consistent reaction at a time, and you handed it over for free. So ask yourself something you won't enjoy answering honestly. If someone wanted to manipulate you tomorrow, would they already know exactly how? Sit with that. Everything that follows depends on it. You were taught to be proud of your consistency. Try looking at it as a liability instead. There's a reason this feels strange to hear. Almost every piece of advice you've absorbed about character pushes you towards sameness. Be the same person in every room. Never change your story. Stay consistent so people know what to expect from you. All of it sounds like wisdom, and none of it asks who actually benefits from your consistency. Rarely you. Almost always whoever's standing close enough to use it. A stranger can predict your order at a restaurant after watching you eat there twice. A colleague can learn, in a single meeting, exactly which objection will make you back down. None of that took effort on their part. You handed it over freely, the same way you'd hand a key to anyone standing close enough to watch you use the lock. Here's the lie you were sold. Reliability is universally good. Consistency always builds trust. Being an open book makes people feel safe around you, and safety is always an advantage. That's only half true, and half-truths are the dangerous kind, because they carry enough reality to feel unquestionable. Notice the advice never arrives with condition attached. Nobody ever tells you to be consistent selectively or reliable strategically. It's always delivered as an absolute, and absolutes tend to benefit whoever's asking you to comply far more than they benefit you. Reliability is good when it's chosen. It becomes a cage the moment it's assumed. One man keeps his word because he decided to. Another keeps his word because everyone already knows he has no other move. The first man has leverage. The second has none. From the outside, they look identical. That changes the instant it matters. Machiavelli drew a distinction most people never fully absorb. He separated the appearance of virtue from the practice of power. A prince, he argued, doesn't need to actually be predictable, generous, or merciful at all times. He needs to be seen as capable of any of those things, while never letting anyone calculate which one he'll choose next. Once a prince becomes fully knowable, he becomes fully manageable. His allies stop earning his favor and start assuming it. His enemies stop fearing his response and start planning around it. Picture one man, early in his career, beloved for his consistency. He always agrees to extra work. He always says yes to the last-minute request. He always smooths over conflict rather than raising it. Everyone calls him easy to work with, and they mean it as a compliment, though what they're really describing is a resource they've learned to draw from without resistance. 3 years pass this way, and he collects gratitude instead of leverage, praise instead of position. Then something shifts, not his character, only his method. He starts pausing before agreeing. Sometimes he still says yes right away. Sometimes he pushes back and asks why the request exists at all. Sometimes he helps, but names a price, a trade, a condition. People call him more difficult now, a little less warmly than before. But watch what happens over the years that follow. Requests slow down, because every request now comes with friction, and friction makes people think twice before spending his time carelessly. 10 years after that first version of himself, the difference isn't subtle. The man who said yes to everything would still be exhausted, still resentful, still doing the same job at the same level, because nobody ever had to negotiate with him for anything. The man who learned to be read selectively has been promoted twice, not because he worked harder, because he was never fully available. Unavailability, it turns out, gets mistaken for value more often than anyone admits. None of this is an accident of personality. It's unread intention operating in real time. Once people can predict your response with total confidence, that response stops costing them anything. And anything that costs nothing gets taken freely, repeatedly, without gratitude, because gratitude requires a possibility that you might have said no. Machiavelli saw the same pattern in the fall of comfortable rulers. A prince who is loved unconditionally and feared not at all eventually finds his subjects have stopped asking permission. They've started assuming it. Love without any shadow of consequence curdles into entitlement, and entitlement, left alone long enough, turns into contempt. History repeated this across 1,000 courts, and the ending was almost always the same. A ruler surrounded by people who no longer feared losing his favor, because they'd long since stopped believing he was capable of withdrawing it. Here's the deeper mechanism, the one almost nobody names out loud. Power is rarely about what you can actually do. It's about what other people believe you might do. A locked door doesn't need testing every day to remain a deterrent. The uncertainty itself is a deterrent. Once someone knows for certain the door is never locked, it stops functioning as a boundary at all, whether or not you ever intended to lock it. That's why unpredictability, used with discipline instead of chaos, isn't manipulation for its own sake. It's the restoration of a boundary that consistency had already worn away. You aren't becoming dishonest. You're becoming unreadable exactly where being read costs you something, while staying perfectly trustworthy everywhere trust actually serves your position. A wall doesn't need to be aggressive to work. It only needs to exist where people expect it open ground. Most people never build a single wall into their own personality, because somewhere along the way they were taught walls were rude or cold or unfriendly. What walls actually are is structural. A house with no walls isn't generous. It's uninhabitable. Lesson 1. Separate reliability from predictability. Most people were never taught the difference between these two words, and that confusion alone explains most of the leverage they've quietly handed over. Reliability means your character doesn't change. Your values, your standards, your integrity stay fixed no matter the circumstance. This should never be sacrificed. A man with no fixed character isn't mysterious. He's just untrustworthy, and untrustworthy men get exiled from power long before they ever taste it. Predictability means your specific reactions can be calculated in advance. Your yes, your no, your price, your breaking point, your soft spot, all mapped and filed away by anyone paying attention. This is the part you need to guard. Not because deception is the goal, but because certainty in the hands of others is a weapon pointed straight at you. The prince who survives stays reliable in his values and unpredictable in his methods. The one who falls stays consistent in both and calls integrity, right up until his enemies use that same consistency to walk straight to the gate he forgot to vary. Think of a negotiator who always opens with the same number, always folds at the same percentage, always signals surrender with the same phrase. Everyone across the table eventually stops preparing new strategy for him, because his old strategy already tells them everything they need. You see this in something as ordinary as a family argument. A parent who eventually says yes after enough pleading hasn't raised an obedient household. He's trained every child in it to know exactly how long persistence has to last before resistance collapses. The value, don't spoil the child, never changed. The method, cave after fourth request, became the exploited pattern. Lesson 2, the danger of the instant response. Pay attention to how quickly you answer messages, how fast you react when someone challenges you, how fast you agree, or how fast you get defensive. Speed itself is information, and information handed out for free gets used against you. Machiavelli understood that a prince who reacts instantly reveals his priorities instantly. If an insult always produces immediate anger, the enemy now knows exactly which lever controls you, and known levers get pulled again and again at the worst possible moments. The disciplined mind builds in a pause, not out of hesitation, out of strategy. A delayed response isn't weakness. It's a refusal to hand over your calculations in real time. Hold silence a beat longer than expected, and people start recalculating their own approach because they can no longer assume they already know how this ends. Watch any skilled negotiator closely. You'll see the same habit. They let a question sit in the air 3 full seconds longer than comfort allows. And in that silence, the other side almost always speaks first, giving away more than they meant to. This plays out over text messages just as easily as it does in boardrooms. Reply within seconds every single time, and you teach everyone around you that urgency will always be met with urgency. Let an hour pass now and then, even when you were free the whole time, and you teach the opposite lesson without saying a word. Lesson 3. Vary the currency you respond with. Most people have exactly one language of reward and exactly one language of punishment, and both get figured out by everyone around them within weeks. Praise this man, and he softens. Go silent on him, and he panics. Threaten his reputation, and he folds instantly. The strategist studies his pattern in others while refusing to display it in himself. Reward loyalty with recognition sometimes. Reward it with opportunity other times. Answer disrespect with confrontation on one occasion, and with complete indifference the next. The inconsistency isn't random. It's calculated so that nobody, not even your closest allies, can build a reliable model of what moves you. Machiavelli warned that a ruler who can be manipulated through one known desire will eventually be manipulated through nothing else. Diversify what moves you, and you remove the single point of failure every manipulator is hunting for. A court that couldn't tell whether their prince valued gold, land, or loyalty above everything else had to serve him fully, because no single gift could ever be assumed enough. The same logic works on something as small as compliments and criticism in daily life. Let flattery always earn your favor, and flattery becomes the only tool anyone bothers using on you, sincere or not. Let criticism always earn your defensiveness, and criticism becomes a preferred weapon of anyone trying to control the room. Keep both currencies a little unpredictable in their effect, and neither one becomes a reliable lever in someone else's hand. Lesson 4. Let your absence speak. There's real power in choosing not to respond at all. Most people can't tolerate this. Silence feels rude to them, like a debt left unpaid. So they rush to fill it with reassurance, explanation, apology, and in doing so hand over the entire negotiation before it's even started. Treat silence as a tool instead of discomfort. Sometimes the most unpredictable move is no move at all. It forces the other party to reveal their next intention first, because they can't stand not knowing yours. Tolerate silence longer than feels comfortable, and you'll change more negotiations in your favor than any clever line could manage. Ambassadors used to train for years before anyone trusted them across the table from a rival court. Half of that training was learning to say nothing while the room searched their face for a signal that never came. Lesson 5. Never explain the full reason. When you say no, you were taught to justify it. When you change direction, you were taught to account for every step. This feels like honesty, but look at what it actually gives away. A full explanation is a complete map of your decision-making, handed out free to anyone who asked, including the people who will use that same map next time they want a different answer from you. Machiavelli's princes rarely explain themselves fully to those beneath them, not out of arrogance, but because a fully explained decision can be argued against, appealed, and eventually reversed through sheer persistence. An unexplained decision, stated once with calm authority, can't be dismantled the same way, because there's no scene for the argument to enter. You don't owe every person a transcript of your reasoning. State the decision. Hold the line. Let the rest stay a mystery. Because mystery is exactly what stops your position from being reverse engineered one justification at a time. The most respected people in any room rarely over-explain themselves. That brevity isn't coldness. It's a refusal to hand out blueprints to people who haven't earned them. Compare that to how often the opposite happens. Someone declines an invitation and offers for separate reasons, each one an opening for the other person to argue against individually. One sentence, stated calmly and left alone, closes a door that for justifications will keep prying back open. Lesson 6. Rotate your routine without announcing it. The predictable man can be found. He can be timed. His habits become a schedule other people quietly build their own strategy around, whether that's a competitor positioning against your known move, or a partner learning exactly which hour of the day to ask you for something you normally refuse. This doesn't call for chaos. It calls for occasional, deliberate variation, applied without explanation. Change the order of your priorities some weeks. Change your tone depending on the room, not from inconsistency of character, but because your rhythm shouldn't become public property. Machiavelli's occasion, the fleeting moment fortune hands to those prepared to seize it, favors a man whose movements can be fully anticipated by whoever's waiting to counter him. A schedule that looks disciplined from the outside is, strategically, just a target with a fixed location. A fortress that runs the same guard rotation every night eventually gets studied, and studied fortresses fall not through greater force, but through better timing. This isn't about becoming erratic. It's about refusing to let your calendar turn into a document anyone could use against you. Vary the small things on purpose. The order of your errands, the hour you check your messages, the day you take meetings. Let the variation itself become part of your discipline instead of a break from it. Lesson 7. Guard your tells the way a prince guards his borders. Everyone has tells. The way your voice changes when you're uncomfortable. The specific phrase you reach for right before you fold in a negotiation. The exact moment your patience runs out in an argument. None of these are flaws to feel ashamed of. They're borders, and undefended borders are the first thing any capable strategist studies before making a move. Study your own tells the way you'd study a rival's. Catch the moment right before you concede, and ask what signals it. Catch the phrase you reach for right before backing down, and think about withholding it or replacing it, so the pattern can't be relied on by anyone paying close enough attention. This isn't paranoia. It's the same discipline a fortified city uses to keep its weakest wall unknown to the army outside it. A skill card player never touches the same part as collar before a bluff twice in the same night. What he's protecting isn't the current hand. It's every hand that follows it. Lesson 8. Reward loyalty unevenly on purpose. There's a temptation to treat everyone who supports you identically because it feels fair. But identical treatment creates a map just as easily as any other pattern, and maps invite exploitation. If everyone knows loyalty always earns the same reward, loyalty itself turns transactional instead of genuine. The prince who varies how he rewards, generously here, modestly there, sometimes with recognition instead of resources, keeps his allies engaged instead of entitled. Nobody can calculate the exact minimum effort required for the exact maximum reward, because the equation refuses to hold still. This single habit stops the slow decay Machiavelli warned about, the moment loyalty stops being earned and starts being assumed, because the terms of the exchange got too clear for too long. Courts that survived generations rarely paid every noble the same coin in the same measure. The uncertainty itself kept ambition pointed at earning favor rather than expecting it. Apply this to something as ordinary as running a small team. A manager who hands out identical praise for every finished task teaches a team that mediocrity and excellence are worth the same reward. A manager whose recognition varies, proportionate but never perfectly predictable, keeps effort pointed upward instead of settling at the minimum required for the guaranteed outcome. Lesson 9. Let enemies guess, not know. Nowhere does unread intention matter more than in conflict. Once an opponent knows exactly how you'll respond to provocation, they've already won before the encounter even starts. Now they can provoke you on their own schedule, in their own chosen arena, using exactly the bait they know you can't ignore. Machiavelli's princes cultivated deliberate ambiguity around their own limits. Sometimes they absorbed an insult without visible reaction. Sometimes they answered something minor with sudden, disproportionate force. It wasn't madness. It removed a map an enemy needed to plan safely. An opponent who can't predict your threshold will hesitate before testing it. And hesitation, in strategy, is often the whole battle. A rival unsure whether a small provocation gets ignored or answered decisively thinks twice before trying either. That single moment of doubt has ended more conflicts before they began than any show of strength ever could. This is why the calmest people in a room are so often the most dangerous ones to underestimate. Nobody knows where their line sits, so nobody tests it casually. The loud reactor, by contrast, gets tested constantly, exactly because his threshold has already been mapped by everyone paying attention. Lesson 10. Reserve one version of yourself for no one. Every prince, according to Machiavelli, has to show different faces to different rooms. Not out of dishonesty, out of necessity, because the room that sees your full hand always eventually uses it against you. But there's a deeper version of this that most people never reach. Somewhere inside you, there has to be a version of your thinking that belongs to no room at all. Not your closest ally, not your most trusted partner, not the mirror you perform confidence for in public. A private core calculation nobody else has access to. Once even one person holds a complete map of your intentions, your unpredictability has exactly one point of failure. And single points of failure are exactly what every strategist since Machiavelli has been trained to find first. This is an isolation. It's sovereignty over your own mind, the last border that should never be handed away, no matter how much trust the person asking for it has earned. Think of it as the difference between a diary you share and a diary you own. Sharing builds intimacy, but every diary shared in full eventually falls into the wrong hands, through betrayal, distance, or simple time. Once it has, there's no getting back what once cost you nothing to withhold. Lesson 11. The danger of being fully known by one person. A particular kind of collapse only happens to men who were otherwise disciplined everywhere else. They guarded their tells at work. They varied their reactions with rivals. They never explained the full reason to strangers. And then, in exactly one relationship, they let their guard drop completely, because it felt like intimacy, because it felt like finally being understood. Machiavelli never wrote directly about marriage or friendship, but the same law governed every alliance he studied. Whoever holds your complete map can end you fastest, whether or not they ever mean to, simply because intention changes over time, and complete information doesn't disappear when loyalty does. A court advisor who knew every weakness of his prince stayed safe only as long as his loyalty held. The moment that loyalty cracked, even slightly, the prince learned something. His most dangerous enemy had been sitting beside him for years. Fully briefed, fully trusted, fully unnecessary to convince of anything, because he already knew exactly where to press. None of this means trusting no one. It means understanding that total transparency, even with someone who loves you, is a decision that keeps costing you long after a relationship that justified it has changed. Keep something unspoken, not out of coldness, but out of the same discipline a fortress uses to keep one gate unmapped even from its own garrison. History carries the same warning. The advisors who fell fastest from a prince's favor were rarely strangers. They were the men trusted with everything for so long that their closeness became the very reason they were eventually feared instead of kept. Lesson 12. The compounding effect of being misjudged. There's a strange advantage that only shows itself over years, not weeks. A man occasionally misjudged, underestimated in one room, and overestimated in another, moves through the world with a kind of cover the fully understood man never earns. People plan around who they believe you are, and if that belief is slightly wrong either way, every plan built on it inherits the same error. That's why Machiavelli's most successful princes rarely bothered correcting every misconception about themselves. Being thought softer than you are invites a challenge you were already prepared for. Being thought harsher than you are prevents challenges that never needed to happen in the first place. Either error, left uncorrected, becomes a kind of camouflage, and camouflage compounds the same way capital does. A single misjudgment in your favor might mean nothing today. A decade of accumulated ones becomes a reputation partly built out of other people's incomplete guesses, working on your behalf while you never lifted a finger to build it. Most people rush to correct every wrong assumption made about them, out of a very human need to be seen accurately. But accuracy isn't always an asset. Sometimes a version of you living in someone else's incomplete imagination does more strategic work than the fully corrected truth ever could. There's an old story, not necessarily factual, useful mainly because it isn't tied to a single verified name. A young advisor once served a minor court known throughout the region for its ruler's transparency. Everyone called it a virtue. You always knew where you stood with him. You always knew exactly what would please him and what would provoke him. Rivals studied him for one season and never needed to study him again because nothing about him ever changed. The advisor watched that ruler lose, slowly, not through one dramatic defeat, but through 1,000 small ones. Every ally squeezed a maximum out of him because a maximum was always known in advance. Every rival timed their moves around a temperament that never varied. He was liked, he was never feared. Within a decade, he was irrelevant, still transparent, still predictable, still exactly the man everyone had already finished calculating years earlier. The advisor left and served another court instead, one whose ruler was, by contrast, endlessly discussed and rarely understood. Nobody could say for certain what would please or provoke her, because both seemed to shift with circumstances nobody outside her inner counsel could fully trace. She wasn't cruel. She kept her word when she gave it, but she gave it selectively and withheld her full reasoning even from those closest to her. Rivals hesitated before testing her, because guessing wrong carried a cost nobody could fully calculate in advance. That uncertainty, more than any army she commanded, was what kept her throne standing long after the transparent ruler's court had been absorbed by someone bolder. The advisor never forgot the lesson buried in watching both of them, one fall and one rise. It was never really about cruelty or kindness. It came down to which ruler handed out a complete map of himself for free, and which one made every single person around her earn each new piece of understanding, one carefully considered exchange at a time. Anyone who hears this eventually raises the same 3 objections, and they deserve honest answers instead of dismissal. First objection: isn't this just manipulation with better branding? Look closely at the distinction, because it matters. Manipulation creates a false picture of you, so someone gives you something they'd never give if they understood the truth. Guarding your patterns creates no false picture at all. You're exactly who you say you are, in every value that counts. You're simply declining to hand over mechanics of how you operate. The same way a locksmith doesn't owe every visitor a diagram of his own front door. Second objection: won't people find me cold or difficult? If I stop being so readable, some will. And that's not a flaw in the strategy, it's the cost of it. Machiavelli never promised universal approval to any prince who chose strength over comfort. The discomfort, though, is rarely permanent. People adjust to a boundary far faster than they adjust to being quietly exploited for years before noticing. The relationships that survived this shift were built on genuine respect in the first place. The ones that don't survive were rarely relationships at all, only arrangements that depended on your predictability to keep functioning. Third objection: doesn't this sound exhausting to maintain all the time? It would be, if the goal were constant performance. It isn't. The goal is selective unpredictability, applied only where being read actually costs you something, while staying entirely natural and warm everywhere else. You don't need to guard your tells with a stranger who'll never negotiate against you. Guard them with a handful of people in situations where being fully known turns into a liability instead of an intimacy. Precision, not paranoia, is the whole discipline. You were taught that being an open book was a form of honor. Nobody mentioned that open books get read by everyone, including the people deciding how much they can take from you before you notice. None of this means becoming cold, cruel, or dishonest. Machiavelli never asked his princes to abandon their character. He asked them to stop broadcasting their next move to every room they entered. There's a real difference between a man of fixed values and a man of fixed reactions, and almost everyone confuses the two, right up until it costs them something they can't get back. Some of you are already thinking of the obvious objection. Doesn't all this just describe becoming manipulative? worth answering directly instead of dodging it. Manipulation creates a false picture of yourself to extract something someone would never willingly give if they understood the truth. Guarding your own patterns isn't that. You aren't lying about who you are. You're simply refusing to hand out the operating manual for free. A locked diary isn't a lie. It's a boundary, and boundaries were never the same thing as deception. No matter how often people who benefited from you having neither like to confuse the two. Look again at the man from earlier, the one who said yes to everything before he learned to make people negotiate. He was never dishonest in either version of himself. He was never cruel. He just operated under a different assumption about what his consistency was worth, and 10 years later, that shift in assumption had built an entirely different life out of the exact same starting point. Ask yourself honestly, tonight, away from this video, and away from anyone watching how you answer, if someone wanted to predict your next move right now, how long would it take them? If the answer comes instantly, you already know which lesson to start with. None of this asks you to become someone colder than you already are. It asks you to notice how much of your current life got shaped by people who learn your patterns faster than you ever learned theirs. That imbalance isn't permanent. It's just a default setting of anyone who was never taught to guard it. And defaults, unlike character, can always be changed the moment you decide they're no longer serving you. Somewhere between the man who explains everything and the man who explains nothing since the version of you this video was actually built for. Reliable where it counts. Unreadable where it matters. And, without ever announcing a single change, no longer fully calculable by anyone. If this video shifted the way you see predictability, don't just scroll past it, like this video. Drop a comment telling me which strategy hit you the hardest, and subscribe, because every video on this channel is built to sharpen your mind and separate you from the crowd that stays comfortable. No fluff, no noise, just doctrine. Most people don't lose this game. They just never played it.